reason I'm excited. I get to introduce to you a gentleman who's going to come on stage and share with you his strategies for overcoming almost insurmountable odds and emerging victorious. He started his career as a player and has spent the last 21 as a coach. With a reputation as one of the game's brightest offensive minds, in his tenure with the Saints, this gentleman has helped his team set records in scoring, in touchdowns. He's guided them through the longest winning streak in team history, culminating in the most wins in a season. And I think you all know what he did this year. He went on to win the very first Super Bowl in the history of the New Orleans Saints franchise. We have a brief video that's going to show you a little bit about what this gentleman has done. Let's take a look. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor and pleasure to introduce to you head coach of the 2010 Super Bowl champion New Orleans Saints, Sean Payton.
I got a little nervous about coming to Atlanta to talk about the Saints' success. Usually we come here once a year to play in the building next door, and it's kind of enemy territory. But in April, on behalf of Microsoft, I'm thrilled. When the season ended this year and our organization had a chance to really enjoy the success of a Super Bowl win, so many opportunities come up for our players, for our coaches, myself as the head coach, and it can be somewhat consuming. Throughout this offseason, my assistant, Sandra, does a great job of trying to screen and really run cover for me as it pertains to speaking events. And really, we've done about 2 or 3. And Microsoft was one that we've had a great relationship with long before our success as a football team. And it was an easy one for us to sign on board with prior to really making this commitment, prior to us winning the Super Bowl. But for all the other 200 requests that we weren't able to fulfill, Sandra's done a great job, and we use the excuse. I hate saying that he's unavailable, so she'll say, hey, he's in Cabo that particular date. Because that sounds better. Anytime you tell someone you're in Cabo, they think, well, you need your rest, you need your relaxation, coach, get away. But if these people ever get together, there's going to be 2 months of Cabo that they're looking at. I'm honored to have this opportunity really to share with you, and I want it to be that. You know, when you come to an event like this for a couple days, you're looking to bring some things away as it pertains to your business. Certainly look at the products and the things that you have to do to be successful. And I found it easiest for me to just really tell the story and what we valued and what we thought was important as it pertained to our challenge right after Hurricane Katrina. And I want to go through in detail a little bit, maybe about how I arrived in New Orleans, to give you a better sense of what we were going through. I had worked the prior 3 seasons before 2006 with the Dallas Cowboys in Dallas, and we had just finished building a brand new home. We had, my wife and I had 2 children, loved living in Dallas. We had a great job with the Cowboys. And I had the opportunity after the 2005 season to interview with a couple football clubs. Now, Katrina had just hit in August, and all of us were well aware of not only New Orleans, but all the Gulf South, the damage it caused, and the chaos, really, that ensued for weeks to follow. And the first interview I took right after the 2005 season was with the Green Bay Packers. Now, I'm from Chicago, Illinois, and to some degree, the Midwest feels like home for myself. My wife's from Indiana. Both of us would consider ourselves Midwesterners. At least that's where we were raised. And so the Green Bay Packer tradition and the success of that organization was one that we certainly valued, and that was the job that I really wanted. And when the season ended, I had worked with Bill Parcells for 3 years. I had taken the interview in Green Bay and felt very confident after the process that I was going to be in the mix at least, or a strong candidate for that position. Shortly after that interview, while they were still finishing their job search, I took the interview with the New Orleans Saints, and that would have been January of 2006, so 3 or 4 months post-Katrina. And I always tell this story because I think all of us to some degree have been involved in an afternoon or a weekend or maybe some job interview where somehow or another you're there and yet you're totally not really thinking of yourself as being committed to that weekend or the idea that you would be taking that position, if you know what I'm going with that. In other words, my flight left Dallas, it landed in New Orleans, and when I went into the airport, there was nothing open. Kiosks, no coffee shops, just quiet. And it almost felt like that was the only flight daily flying out of DFW into New Orleans. In other words, there was no one around. And I had seen, just like so many of you, all the CNN, all the news channel, really depictions of what happened during Hurricane Katrina and post-Katrina. And now the thought of coming here and possibly moving my wife and 2 young children here was pretty daunting. But the whole time I had my cell phone in my pocket. It was a Tuesday. I remember that well. Mickey Loomis, who's our general manager and the guy that ended up hiring me, picked me up at the airport himself. And we drove back from the airport to the Saints complex. And if you've ever been to New Orleans, airline drive, even pre-Katrina, has really never been anything to talk about. So as we take the drive and we look out the window, and the whole time immediately Mickey's trying to have conversation and I'm just trying to gather information. In other words, he's talking, but I'm just looking out the window, in the windows, just because I had seen so much that would have been reported. And you saw the blue temporary roofs on all the buildings, cars on the side of the roads. I mean, it was a nightmare. And I can recall by the time we got to the facility, I think I had checked my cell phone 3 different times for that 908 area code in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Please. Because at that moment, really, that was Mickey's problem. That was the Saints' problem. That wasn't my problem. And certainly there was sympathy, but at the same time, there's no way I'm going to be able to convince my wife to come here right now. And so we went through that first day of meetings, and I really saw a lot with Mickey Loomis, but that challenge still sat there in the back of my mind. That evening, we kind of had that hour at the hotel where I went back to my room. We were going to meet for dinner at 7 o'clock, and sure enough, I had a voice message from the general manager of the Green Bay Packers, who's a great football guy, Ted Thompson, and it was a voice message that said they had gone in a different direction, that they were going to hire another coach. And I'll never forget, it was about 6:30. I got a half an hour before dinner, and I got the message. I just threw the cell phone down on the bed, and this whole time I'm thinking, man. And then the next step, I go into the mirror and start straightening the tie up a little bit. and becoming a little bit more interested, or at least trying to think of the idea of doing something like this. And the point I'm getting to a little bit with this is, about a month or two later, there was a quarterback with the San Diego Chargers, Drew Brees, who had just injured his throwing shoulder. And the Chargers were going to move in a different direction, and he was available. There were two teams really that had interest, the Miami Dolphins and the New Orleans Saints. And I think, no different than myself, there was that apprehension or that uncertainty of coming to New Orleans. Certainly Miami was probably a little bit more comforting, or at least less risky. But he didn't get quite the same reception or same offer there in Miami. And sure enough, he ends up with the New Orleans Saints. And then about a month later in the draft, Reggie Bush was supposed to get drafted by the Houston Texans. And right at the final hour, they changed their minds, and they end up signing Mario Williams, drafting him. And Reggie Bush comes reluctantly, if you will, to the New Orleans Saints. And however it worked out, it ended up working out for a reason. And one of the things that I could easily lead into, because there's a lot of challenges you all face right now with your businesses, with the economy. There's a lot of reasons why you can't be successful. And I know as a coach, one by one, we began to hire our staff. And for everything that possibly went wrong in the following months after I took that job, whether flights were missed, hotel reservations were screwed up, or meals were late, all sorts of things were going on. But it all seemed like Katrina was the easy blame. And it became kind of amongst the staff our little ongoing joke in regards to why something didn't go right. Well, it was blamed on Katrina. And all of us, all of you, have these same distractions or reasons why you're not going to have success, or you're not going to be able to compete in your specific field. And I think that if you can prevent those from creeping in, because certainly Katrina was real, I would also share with you the economy is something your competitors are having to deal with. And for us in New Orleans, we just had to deal with Katrina. The other 31 teams did not. But that wasn't going to be the reason. In other words, if 31 teams just played better than us, or 31 teams drafted better than us, or coached better than us, that was going to be one thing. But we just weren't going to allow that aspect of it to keep us from having success. And those early months, what was critical was the opportunity that I had in Dallas in a guy like Bill Parcells that told me clearly, hey, you've got to figure out what's kept that organization from winning the last 35 years. You've got to be able to figure that out quickly, or 3 years from now, they'll be having another press conference and announcing the hire of another head coach. And that's the truth. And so it sounds easy, but we had to quickly identify, hey, what mistakes have been repeated here? Because it's hard to not have success over that length of time. And chances are there were mistakes that were made with each regime, with each new hope, new staff, new hiring. Somehow or another, there were sins that were being committed again and again and again, and the success wasn't coming. The one area that I think is critical, and it's I think sometimes easy, but also sometimes hard for people to say, let's study closely who is winning in our industry, in our business. And I've said this a number of times. The New England Patriots in the NFL, in our industry, were the team that if you didn't pay attention to what they were doing, then you were foolish. They had had success, won 3 Super Bowls. They had really in an industry maybe that you think is an eye sport or a selfish time for athletes, New England had redefined the concept of really playing as a team and building through character. And people use that all the time, but clearly they had done that. They had drafted well. They had made good business decisions. They had good leadership. They had a sound plan in place. They had a great quarterback. But I'm really talking more about the parallel of a team like ourselves that wasn't there yet and really paying attention to the competition and not being afraid to say, hey, this is something we got to look closely at. Because oftentimes in those businesses where there's been failure, these walls get built up. And what happens is the 17 coaches that leave in 2005, as they walk out the door, all the losses go with them. They weren't successful, and we're on to the next staff. And typically, in our business, no different than yours, all of us share in those losses. Everyone in the building, from the person that's doing the laundry to the person that's handling the marketing, from the person that's handling the business aspect of the PR, from the person that's doing the finance. You see, it's interesting because there's always this conflict that exists within the building. The ticket guy says we're not selling tickets because we're not winning enough games. The marketing guy says, look, we've got a great marketing plan. We just need a product we can market. The coaches will say, well, look, we need better players. The players will say, we need a better plan. And so this losing gets pushed to the different groups, just as when you have success, it gets pulled from, and everyone steps a little bit more forward. The marketing guy says, you know, I know we had a Super Bowl winning season, but this whole Saints campaign this year was the reason we've got 50,000 people on a waiting list. And the business guy says, you know, we've made better business decisions than we ever have in the history of the organization. The coaching staff says our plans each week were the best in the NFL, and the players clearly at this time of the year and their agents say we need a raise. It was our skill set. But this exists in your industry as well. So I would argue, and this was if you asked me one thing about why was a guy like Bill Parcells so successful, is he absolutely prevented the walls from being built up within an organization. In other words, all of us from the waist up were visible. No one was so protected and so secure in their position that it wasn't going to be their responsibility. We were going to foster and really cultivate this environment that made it special, but also the environment that made everybody in the building accountable. That was going to be critical to us. And now that's easier said than done, and there's really the work of a lot of people that go into that. Number one, my boss, Mickey Loomis, who hired me, has got to be able to embrace and allow me to hire my staff and look for the right people we want to hire. And then I've got to allow the coaches, and I've got to allow the person in marketing, and I've got to allow the PR guy. But it starts with finding the right people here now as well, and I'm going to get to that in a second. But the whole organization needs to feel that accountability in regards to the end result. And listen, when we go through some choppy waters and we lose a couple of games, it's always interesting. When you guys have a tough quarter, it's always interesting to just see the natural reaction that people have in your company. And they step back a little bit. There's some whispers. And that's where you've got to lean heavily on the decisions of finding the right people to handle the choppy waters. Because, listen, when I use the term character as a coach, and we want to hire somebody to come in, or look for a football player with good character and intelligence. The reason we're looking for that character is not for when we're winning, but the reason we're looking for the character is for when it gets a little hairy. In other words, we've just lost 2 games. That's why we're going to value very highly the intelligence and the character of people we bring in. So we clearly, and this was the #1 thing, we just shared this back in the green room. You got apples and water, all this stuff back here. We've been eating it all day, waiting to go on. But that's if someone said, Coach, what was the thing then that they hadn't been doing? And this is not an indictment on the years prior, but it was something that became our charge, is we were going to find the right people. We were going to find the right people. We were going to study the teams like the Patriots that were going to have success. We were going to make everyone in the building equally accountable. And that being said, we were going to acknowledge and constantly remind everyone in the building when they were doing things well. You know, I tell this story, you know, you have to celebrate. Jerry Jones, I think, is as good a businessman as I've ever been around. And he was our owner in Dallas and still is, but I worked with him for 3 years. But the one thing he understood was celebrating the little things. You're all in businesses where you have little victories, maybe in a bad year, but you have to be able to, some way, shape, or form, recognize and celebrate those things. You know, I can think of a number of cases early on that first year after Katrina. We were looking for a reason to give somebody in the building an attaboy or a game ball. And you know, those things are hard early on. I mean, and they seem sometimes rehearsed. But I think when you're having some success, it's important for everyone in the building to recognize their part in what they're doing. I just made a few notes here, and I've got this clock going. I spoke just the other day in New Orleans. You know, that Speakers Bureau comes through town, and they've got Giuliani and Colin Powell, Laura Bush, and all these great speakers, Zig Ziglar. And I agreed to do it, but I was hesitant because I didn't know who I was going to follow. You guys with me? I mean, that's your worst nightmare. And so I got there that afternoon. You check in, and they put you in another green room where you eat fruit and drink water again. And I saw that the schedule had lunch, and then I was up next. And that was like the biggest relief in my life, because I can follow lunch. I just didn't want to follow Colin Powell or Giuliani after he talked about 9/11 or any of those great speakers. I kind of feel like, for me professionally, and I said this last night to my wife, we've been through so much. I was at the New York Giants for 4 seasons as an offensive coordinator, and that was during 9/11. So I was 2 miles away, 5 miles away, if you will, Giant Stadium, when 9/11 took place. And then here we are, you know, years later, right after Katrina. 2 months from now, we go to the White House as a team to celebrate the Super Bowl championship. And I kind of feel like I've led this Forrest Gump life, if you will. And the only thing left I have to do when I meet the president is find a way to drink 6 Dr. Peppers and tell him I got to pee. If I can do that, it's done. The one thing that happens when you're able to, listen, you guys are all in this position right now, this uncertainty as to where you're going with your business. Now, I'm not trying to be presumptuous, but I know there was that uncertainty as we kept diving in on Airline Drive in 2006. One pitfall after another. One coach says he can't come. One player decides to go to another team, and yet you just keep, sometimes that light isn't real bright, but you got to trust in the process. You really do. At least in order to reap the greatest rewards ever. Jerry said when I left, he says, you know, the one thing that seems interesting about your decision here, because this is a job opportunity to be the head coach in the NFL, which is serious, he said, but if you can win there, he says, that's something that you'll have for the rest of your life. Now, no one thinks you can, but he equated it, that's true. He equated it, though, to some of his business deals where some of his greatest rewards from a business standpoint came with maybe more risk. But now I'm not talking about just risk where you're just saying, hey, hit or miss, but well thought out plans, and yet against a lot of odds. And I would say he's right 4 years later. And he shared this same story with me a month ago at one of our owners' meetings. That 4 years later, we end up with a team that wins 13 games, goes into the postseason, and finds ourselves playing in the Super Bowl in front of 125 million television viewers. And when something like that happens, and you guys have all seen, if you're not from Indianapolis here or Atlanta, I'm assuming you were rooting for the Saints 2 months ago. I met a couple guys that were Vikings fans. All right, so I made sure we know where they're at. But having gone through this experience, the one thing that became apparent for us, and this is unique to, this is really just different from any of the other teams and probably anything you're involved with, and yet I wouldn't say definitely, but for us, the timing and when it happened, this became bigger than football. In other words, this was something that when I set out to be a coach, you wanted to advance, be competitive, have success. I wanted to be a college head coach early in my career. I coached 12 years at the collegiate ranks. And then when I had the opportunity to work in the NFL, I wanted to coach at the pro level as a head coach. But what happened in New Orleans after Katrina with this team and the city was much more than any one of us had gotten into athletics for. I mean, it was much more deeper than that. And something like that happens, you got to write a book. Now, I've got my marketing guy sitting here in the front row, and if we had copies, he'd be ready to sell you copies, but we don't. I'm not pitching the book. But what I am telling you is what just took place in the last 4 years, although at times it looked bleak, at times it was frustrating, with the right people, the right plans, studying the right successful teams in our industry, it began to take shape. And then all of a sudden you look back on it and it's happened. And it's happened. And the uniqueness here is it's happened to a region, really, this whole Gulf South, probably at a time when they needed it most. And I've said this publicly, I've said it to our players. All of us are really blessed to be in this position to, listen, we're all just parts of this story. And yet, nobody will ever get tired of a good story. Now, I want to talk a little bit about a different subject here. And this is going to be back to my little friend in the front row. I do think that the details with which you operate from are critical. The small, minute details. How am I doing on time? I've got a little clock here, 26:17, so I'm going to keep going. The details with which you operate are critical. We played in Super Bowl 44 this year. We had to find a way to make sure we were ready for all the distractions. And where I'm getting at is this. The Colts, our competitor, your competitor, had already been in this game and had success in this game, and we were new to it all. So here are some of the things that took place, and I think some of this stuff's entertaining, or at least got a chapter in the book. You know, when you bring a large amount of people to a city for a week, your wives, your husbands, all the people from an organization, let's say 250, 300 people, there's going to be headaches, right? Rooms aren't going to be ready. Somebody's going to be upset that someone got more tickets. Someone's not going to like the room view they have. Maybe transportation. That's going to happen. And so just from experience and talking with teams that had been in this game and had success, and again, this applies to everyone here, we made sure that in each room there were all sorts of things every night. In other words, there was bathrobes the first night, gift baskets the next night. We had this whole propaganda battle that we had to win as it pertained to the Indianapolis Colts, because clearly they had the same challenges. So my friend here, Mike Ornstein, arrives 2 weeks before the game ever starts, and there's billboards all over Miami with just a black fleur-de-lis on it. Now, this is all going to cost some money, but relative to what we're doing, it's going to be rather cheap, at least in the realm of winning a Super Bowl. So the fleur-de-lis are on billboards, not only in the city of Miami, but they're on two specific billboards the Colts have to pass every day on their bus to practice. So I know that Peyton Manning every day on the bus while he's eating his muffin is looking at the fleur-de-lis thinking, how'd this all get done? They're at the bus stops, train stations, they're everywhere. Each night there's certain items that are in the room. We've got everything from cell phones, I mentioned bathrobes, gift cards, all of that. Each night there's something. So when there is an issue, it seems minor because we're doing this thing in such a nice way. And I also know that the Colts players' wives and members of the organization are eventually going to get wind that, did you hear what the Saints are doing? Really? Hey, we're going to create this illusion that we know exactly what we're doing. We know exactly what we're doing. Everything to Monday's practice. You know, Parcells told me, make sure you're practicing when their plane's landing. Make sure you're out. In other words, you're given the impression that as they're traveling, look, we had to travel as well. We just got in Monday, but we were going to be on the practice field when their wheels touched down. To with a little bit of rain where we canceled our practice and went actually to the Colts facility on that Monday and practiced there and kind of circled that turf a little bit, if you will, when their plane landed. Now listen to me a second because it gets better. Obviously, these things are fun to do when you win this game. All right? You're able to come and speak to a bunch of people at a conference like this. And I was on the other end of this in 2000 with the Giants. We lost to the Baltimore Ravens, and you don't get any invitations. And you can really go to Cabo for 2 months if you want. To the point in which my little friend here has already talked to the guy in charge of playing the music at the Super Bowl, which is an impartial venue, right? And if the Saints score late in this game, our fight song, Stand Up and Get Crunk, is going to be played over the loudspeaker system, but he's got 4 tickets to the game, so everything's taken care of. Now, I didn't say everything's got to be done above the board, but there's certain things I didn't want to hear about. But these were the details. And there's a ton more here. But these were the details that all go into looking back and then say, well, was it our game plan, the onside kick and all that won the game? Probably not. Was it just our players and Drew Brees? Probably not. Was it the way we handled the work week leading up to the game? Probably not. It's a combination of all these things that puts yourself in this position to achieve something special. And that is special as you define it in your business, whatever that is you're looking for. One of the things I want to finish with, with what I think is most important. So the game ends, and you won the game, and you're on the field, and you have that trophy presentation. Your family's there. This is all going to go by real quick. And you know that the Super Bowl rings are coming. There's bonuses tied in for everyone. Just as many of you guys share the same type of bonus system with your workers. All the pearls of success are great. In other words, everything from A to Z. A lot of it's the notoriety, a lot of it's the money, all that other kind of stuff. But I would say this, though, and I mean this with all my heart. What you find out that's special is that really it's that journey now back to 06. It's that journey back to 2010 as you sit here with some tough decisions to make. But it's the journey from the beginning till the very end that you miss most and that you appreciate most. So the game ends and we're in the locker room afterwards. We're enjoying the celebration. And it's about 10:30 at night. And we know back at the hotel there's going to be 500, 600 people waiting for a post-game party. But we've got this 25-minute bus ride from the stadium to the Intercontinental Hotel in downtown Miami. And there's 4 buses always. Players and coaches always kind of split up, and they ride the same buses each step of the way. And so we're all kind of creatures of habit. I'm always on bus 1, seat A. Drew Brees is over here, and Joe Vitt and other coaches and players. No different than bus 2, 3, and 4. In other words, you ride them all year long that way. And so here we are, and we've got a little cooler of beer and soda, and we've got this 25-minute ride from the stadium to the hotel, and there's that little bit of postpartum, and there's no more games to play. You know, it's like you caught the rabbit, and you never expected to, but you kept trying and trying, and once you caught it, you thought, what do we do now? And I remember thinking, all of us felt the same way. You just wanted that bus ride to last forever, because once you got to the hotel and you saw all your family and friends, you knew it was the last time that this team was ever going to be together. And I would also say that with any one of your businesses, that if you have that success that you're planning on having today in 2010, in 2012, 13, or 14, you're going to lose good employees, and that's a good sign. Be nervous when no one's trying to hire your people. But that was the special part. And it wasn't the money, and it wasn't the trophy, the rings, or anything else that went with it. That enjoying it with the right people along the way is I think, what it's all about. I appreciate you guys being here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good stuff.
All right. Now you guys are going to have a rare opportunity to actually ask the coach a question or two. So I think we have some lights that are going to come up, and we have some microphones that are already in the audience. So please, do we have any football fans out there who want to ask him a question?
No Vikings fans.
No Vikings fans. Come on up to the mic. Go ahead, step on up. Real quick, before these guys get their chance, I have to ask. I mean, I know that you're among the most, if not the most, creative coach in the football league right now. The onside kick. How do you make a call like that? How do you balance the risks and decide when you're going to take a chance like that so that it'll come out successful?
I think a couple things. It's a great question. I think that first off, you have to swallow hard. All right. But we had spent a lot of time researching that opportunity in regards to our kickoff team. And we felt that we actually had a statistical number of somewhere between 65 and 70% chance of it being successful. The idea, if we weren't successful, was going to really be 20 yards difference. So one of the things it allowed us to do, it allowed me to do, is really empower our players. We didn't really plan on calling it initially to start the game at the end of the beginning of the second half. Something we decided at halftime we wanted to do, but we knew we were going to call it in that game. The other thing was really, and it really became more of a vote of confidence all week long, that they kind of dared the coaches to call this. And then at some point, 2 nights before the game, I basically had come out and said, hey, you guys are going to have to make me look right here, that we're going to call it in this game. Now, we thought we'd call it when we had the lead. We ended up calling it to start the second half, and I think had any of us known that it was going to be a 5-minute pile, we probably wouldn't have called it. So it was something that was measured and thought out, and our players executed it.
Awesome. I'm going to start over here with number 3 because that guy had his arm like way up. So go ahead, sir.
Just this past year, the owners decided to change the overtime rule. What is your opinion? What is your opinion of the new overtime rule?
You know what? Much has been written. They made the change so that one field goal wouldn't end the game, and I think probably I had come out and made some comments against it. I think all of us are anxious to see in this first season how that works. The thing that is different is it only applies in playoff games. So all the regular season games that we participate in will be what we know is currently the traditional first team to score. But in the event of the postseason, when we're in the postseason, if a team scores by a field goal, the other team gets an opportunity. And I think everyone's excited to see how it looks, not just in year 1, but after a few years.
So you like it?
Kinda.
All right, let's go to number 2.
Hey, Coach. My name is Charles Coe. I'm from New Orleans, longtime season ticket holder, and was in Miami when we won that game. I want to thank you for that. But I'd like for you to talk for a moment about accountability. I know that I've read several things that you've said in the past about holding people accountable and measurable components of accountability. Could you talk a little bit about how you hold your players and your coaching staff accountable, and that process that you go through of holding people accountable to meeting certain goals?
I think that's always a tough challenge, because oftentimes people will say, all right, well, who's ultimately judging or making those decisions? Now, myself and Mickey Loomis are the ones that handle and decide on football operations. But I'll give you a great example. And this is back to conflict of interest. We just had the NFL draft, and in our league, it's the opportunity to select college players. So the personnel side of the building that's in charge of scouting and drafting these players obviously wants to see them have success. They want to see the draft picks do well. And we do too as coaches. In other words, all of us involved in the process want to see them flourish. But that all being said, each year there'll be some player that wasn't drafted that is outperforming a player that has been drafted. And the quickest way for us to lose credibility in what we're doing in the locker room and what we're doing from a football standpoint is to clearly overlook the difference in performance because we selected one player and the other player came via free agency. And so one of the things that we talk about all the time is once the employee is in the building, how he or she arrived, the players arrived, is really unimportant to us. Now, obviously, there's a developmental period that goes on with certain players, and I'm not just saying there's a blanket rule to this, But I'm going to give you an example of 3 years ago. We drafted a running back in the 4th round out of Ohio State who we thought was a real good player and probably was a decent player. And we signed a free agent running back from Illinois, Pierre Thomas. And if anyone just watched practice, Pierre was playing better than this individual every day. And so it was impossible for me to overlook that and cut Pierre and keep the draft pick. And so when we made that decision to keep Pierre and cut the draft pick, there's a lot of credibility that goes on. And although that's tough, and you can look at it two ways, you can look at it as the mistake made with the draft pick, but really the bigger mistake is to continue down that path thinking, well, one mistake now, we're going to correct it. His numbers are going to go up at some point. And I think that I think there's a delicate balance there. But I think the players, not only the players, coaches, everyone feels that sense of accountability. And it gets back to, eliminating these brick walls that all of us by human nature build up each year, another row. And pretty soon we all are insulated and very comfortable and feel not very vulnerable. And yet it might be the last thing we want to be in regards to being productive. And so that's important.
All right, great question. Let's go over here to number 1.
Hey, Coach Payton, how are you? As an Eagles season ticket holder, you're pretty much quite the arch nemesis right now, but I'll leave you alone today on that. I heard you mention Bill Parcells as a great influence. I can just tell by the way you speak about him. Who else do you really attribute as a great influence or teaching you motivational skills for the most part, for both players and for coaches on your staff?
I think my first NFL job was with the Eagles in 1997 and 98, and I worked for
we miss you.
I worked for John Gruden and spent a year with him and was taught a lot in regards to our plan on how to prepare, how to work. He was a tireless worker. My high school coach had a lot to do with my career and my decisions, and really, giving me a vision at a time when, when you're just in high school, you're not certain as to what you want to be. But I've said this a number of times. There's so many people along the way that I've been able to look at and say, I like this aspect, or I'm taking something positive from what they're doing. The 4 years in New York with the Giants really gave me a great vision for just an overall organization that was stable, successful, had great staying power, and well thought of, probably one of the most well thought of organizations in sports. So those opportunities have given me, be it in Philadelphia, 12 years in college, each step along the way, guys like that and teachers like that have helped me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, let's take another one from number 2 here.
Thank you. Coach Payton, I'm Don Puzio from New Orleans. He asked the accountability question, but I wanted to ask you, and thank you for what you've done to my city. I've been thrust into uncertainty in California. I've been in California since Katrina. I've started my own business last year. I'm at the threshold of it. And I just couldn't miss this opportunity I sat in Tulane Stadium and watched Tom Dempsey kick the 63-yard field goal. And it's been hard. I'm coming back home sooner or later, but right now I'm still stuck in California. So, and they don't know how to deal with me, being from New Orleans. Because you know how us Cajuns are. But I want to thank you and the staff, Benson, Mickey, and the rest of y'all for doing, for the city and for the region what nobody else could do.
Thank you.
One more question over here.
Coach, my name is Dave McCaffrey, and I live in Indiana right now. But I'm a lifelong Giants fan from childhood. So one of the comments that you had that resonated with me was the details with which you operate are critical. And I also have a military background, and I think the head football coach in the NFL and the commanding officer of a ship at sea have that unique combination of the details as well as setting the vision and the course for the entire organization. Some of the examples you talked about were right when you were on the edge as you were leading into the Super Bowl. But I think where a lot of the challenges come in are those summer practices and that week-to-week, the details on the week-to-week basis. Can you speak to some of those details and some of the best practices that you've realized with your organization?
You know, I think number one is clearly identifying the boundaries. You know, we have an off-season program that we require the players to be at where they lift and run. We then get into the mini camps that take place in May and June. We think we practice probably as well, if not better than anyone in football. And if you were to see us practice, it's very time regimented. It's very on schedule. It's also very creative. We'll do some things. There's always that sense, and I've got a great group of coaches that are able to tell me, hey, it's time to back off a little bit. Let me give you an example. That first year we started in 2006, we probably ended up, you know, turning over the roster by 35 players. And we had gone through the month of May and June with a number of practices. We weren't in training camp yet, but we were right at a point where these guys were really tired of us. And we were extremely demanding. And then we decided to take the paintball excursion. 20 miles away, we found a facility where they could have 100 football players show up. We had 4 bus loads. We had the Gatorade. We had a whole PowerPoint presentation as to what the teams were going to be. And so regardless of whatever we were going to do, practice, game plan, a team building activity like the paintball trip, whatever it is that we were going to do, it was going to be well thought out, clearly defined, and there was not going to be any gray area as to what the expectation level of the event, the day, the minute was going to be like. And I think that I would say to you, your employees, our players, crave structure. They crave discipline. And although it may seem at the time they're screaming out for it. And I think our players were.
Awesome. All right, we have one more question. I'm so happy to see the ladies being represented. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Brenda. I'm from Indianapolis. You mentioned Katrina being your excuse for everything going wrong. We kind of have our own little Katrina situation right now where we've been stuck in the way we've done things for so long. And it's so easy to say, well, we can blame, I'll just say Katrina at this point. So how do you implement change? How do you get things moving in a direction that takes you from the past into where you need to go in the future?
I think 2 things. First off, I want to acknowledge that all my in-laws are from Indiana. And they were the only ones on flights to Miami that had Saints jerseys. So we get back to that region a lot. I think it's important to identify the same old mentality. In other words, the mail's late today again. Well, it's always late on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And, well, that's unacceptable. In other words, there is that. And when we arrived that first season, and it can still exist now when you're having success, and our biggest challenge is going back now after a Super Bowl with that idea that we're just going to throw the football out there and win football games. But that same old mentality of, well, this is just how it's been done. And I think all of us are constantly or have to closely look at new ways of doing things. And let me bring up a good example, and this maybe shifts to a little technology segue in favor of Microsoft, but hear me out a second. When I first got hired as a coach at San Diego State in 1988, we used to use 16 millimeter film to view the games and study. And the problem with the film is you only could watch that one play on that reel of film. In other words, although it was a touchdown that we used throwing the football in the red zone, I couldn't split that up 3 ways. We only had one film. And then in '89, everyone was moving to the video tape format, where it was a little bit easier. It was kind of like when we went from 8-track tapes to cassettes, you know, and it became a little bit more efficient to where we're currently, all our videos digital, no different than your music selection when you want to hear a playlist. If we want a playlist of all the third down snaps that the Colts had last year inside the 20-yard line, we just have to hit it and it comes up. And, well, we got to keep craving this, though, if we're gonna find this, ways to be more efficient. My daughter's 13 years old. I'll give you a great example. She's 13 years old, and when my wife's water broke, I got a page. I didn't get a cell phone call, I got a page. Now, that was just 13 years ago, back when you had maybe you had a phone, and it was in the car, and it sat in the chair next to you. And we've got the draft going on, and we've got the Microsoft touchscreen where we put the magnets of the players on the board this whole weekend, and their profile comes up and the comparisons come up, and we used to look in books for this information. And so I think we got to constantly look to improve what we are doing and evaluate everything about what we're doing closely.
So you're embracing technology.
We have to, or you're going to get left behind.
All right, we couldn't ask for more than that. Let's give Sean a hand of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.